Swadikap, Distinguished Professor Dr. Pablo Mendes de Leon, Associate Professor Dr. Lalin Gorwutikun Rangsi, representatives from the Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand, and representative from Bangkok Airways, colleagues, students, and esteemed participants. It is my privilege to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University, who sends his warmest greetings and best wishes to all the participants. He extends his sincere apologies for not being able to join us in person this afternoon due to the unexpected schedule overlap. And so he asked me to express his appreciation for the importance of today's event, and he hopes to join us later for some photo. So to do the welcoming, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this academic seminar to discuss one of the most significant developments in contemporary air law in this region, which is the ASEAN-EU Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement. It's a major step in the evolution of aviation regulation in our region, and it affects, of course, our airlines, our regulators, and the broader aviation ecosystems. So for the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University, we strive to provide a platform for dialogue. So this reflects our ongoing commitment to fostering a meaningful learning environment for students and the public. And we want to create spaces where academic insight and regulatory experience and industry perspectives come together. So it is therefore a great honor for us to welcome Professor Dr. Pablo Mendes de Leon, one of the world's most respected scholars in air and space law. He's a distinguished professor at Leiden University and The Hague, and his extensive body of work has shaped the development of international air law across many jurisdictions. And his renowned book, International Air Law, has long been widely recognized as an authoritative text in the field, and of course available in our faculty library. And we are very grateful to have you here with us, and you have traveled so far to share your expertise with us today. I would also like to express our sincere appreciation to Faculty of Law, Thammasat University, and specifically to Associate Professor Dr. Lalin Gorwutikun Rangsi. Dr. Lalin is a leading Thai scholar in air and space law and has played an important role in advancing academic understanding and public policy in this very specialized area. We are also honored to have with us the Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand as our co-host. CAT, of course, plays a pivotal role in shaping Thailand's aviation landscape and ensuring that national regulatory frameworks evolve in line with the international standards. And we have some representative from CAT with us here in this room as well. And we would also like to express our appreciation to our co-host, Bangkok Airways, Asia's boutique airline, for your participation and support. Bangkok Airways is Thailand's leading regional carriers and has been recognized for their long-standing contribution to advancing Thailand's aviation sector. And just recently, they hosted the Assembly of Presidents of the Association of Asia Pacific Airline in Bangkok. So the engagement today reflects the importance of industry preparedness to an understanding of potential regulatory change and preparing for the new competitive environment. So with all these remarks, I sincerely hope that on behalf of the Dean, that today's lecture and discussion will deepen our collective understanding of the ASEAN-EU air transport framework and support informed decision-making and help all the stakeholders, particularly Thai airlines, to prepare for the potential implementation of CATA in a fair and strategic manner. So on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Law, I thank you all once again for joining us both here in this room and also online on our Facebook page. And for your participation, I wish everyone a productive and engaging and insightful discussion today. So thank you very much. Okay, done with that. That's the ceremonial part. Now, let me put on my other hat. I'm Pawat Satyanurak. I'm a lecturer at this Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University, and today I will serve as the moderator and also one of the panelists for today's discussion. So without further ado, may I invite Professor Dr. Pablo Mendes de Leon on the stage, as well as Professor Dr. Lalin Korbutikun Rangsi. So thank you very much, Professor. I understand you arrived this morning and you look fresh. And
fresh because of the refreshing air of Bangkok and the welcoming atmosphere here in Bangkok were fantastic. Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Pawat, for your wonderful and warm words. I'm delighted to be back in Bangkok. It's not my first visit here. I've been here a couple of times. I'm always enjoying, and I'm not saying this as a matter of gratitude or politeness, but I say this as sincere words, the gracious hospitality of this city, of the places where I come, and especially of the people around me. Of course, in the first place, my dear friend, Assistant Professor Dr. Lalin Korbutikun. It's a bit difficult for me to pronounce, but it's a beautiful name, and I know now a bit the origin of that name. And I'm very happy to see you again. She worked for a time in Leiden at our university and has there succeeded in defending marvelously her thesis on handicapped passengers in aviation. So she brought together two fields of law, air law and human rights law. And that was a very successful thesis, which I was happy to accompany, supervise, if you want to put it that way, with Professor Aart Hendricks, whose name I want to mention here today. I had the pleasure to meet Dr. Pawat today, learned a bit about his background, international law, business law, air law, and a dynamic person as I see him, and dynamically bringing together all these fields of law. And that, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen who are listening either here or online, brings me also as a sort of an introductory remarks to the subject we are going to address this afternoon, which is the EU-ASEAN agreement on, or the ASEAN-EU agreement on air transport. And that brings together not only air law, but also international economic law, international business law, and international law generally. It's a fascinating agreement on paper. How and whether it will work in practice is quite another question. There are still some hurdles to be taken, both legally and in practice, but we'll get back to that either during my presentation or in discussion time. I try to contextualize a bit the agreement because the EU is very ambitious, I must say, in exporting its values to other parts of the world. And it's doing so by exporting its regulations, be it the emissions conditions for emissions of aircraft, passengers regulations, which we will discuss tomorrow, competition law principles, or the management of air transport agreements. We'll get back to that later this afternoon, how to manage air transport agreement. The EU is very proud of what it has done, rightly or wrongly, that's another question, but they find that they should lead the world into a new environment, the EU, of aviation law. And that brings me to the first remark. The EU is not built on states. It is built on states, of course, but the organization is a supranational organization, which is in effect an organization which tries to foster the internal market and tries to make agreements with non-EU parties on trade, on international trade, sometimes forgetting that air transport is not subject to the trade principles of the WTO, of the World Trade Organization, and that the trade in air services is not part of the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade in Services. And that makes the whole thing a bit complicated. They sometimes want to forget that because in WTO and in GATS, the EU has quite a prominent place. But that is very different in aviation because, as I said, aviation is not part of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and is not part of the General Agreement. Air transport, the operation of air transport services are not part of the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade in Services. By the way, it's practically the only industry, the only economic activity which is not part of the GATS. And that has a long history which goes back to the First World War in Europe, the Second World War in Europe, where they also recognized the danger of aviation. They could fly easily from one country to another. And we see that now as we speak with drones flying from Russia to Ukraine and back. So aircraft can fly from one country to another, and there are no hurdles at all in the air. It's a continuous medium. There are no hurdles, which means we must establish legal boundaries, which are very strict. This is why the Chicago Convention was drawn up in 1944, which celebrated its 80th birthday last year. And with that, it's the oldest, most ratified convention still in force in the world. We have environmental protocols and agreements made in the 1990s, which have even more states parties. Chicago Convention has precisely 193 states parties, but there are environmental agreements which have 196 state parties, but they were made much later in the 1990s. So that is a bit the background, and the EU is not a party to the Chicago Convention because the EU, however it would like to be a state, it is not a state. It tries and wants to behave as a state, but it is not a state. And only states can become a party to the Chicago Convention. Well, to a bit closer to this country, and we talked about it over lunch, we have Taiwan. Taiwan is not a party, is not a state party to the Chicago Convention. China, the mainland China, doesn't want it to be because it considers Taiwan as part of the People's Republic of China. And in our part of the world now, Russia is trying to take away the sovereignty of Ukraine. That's our problem. And you have a problem here in Taiwan. We read about the complex in our newspapers in East Asia, Japan, China, Taiwan. Thailand, as we see it, is a bit out of it, but China and Japan at the moment, what we read, is not so easy because of the Taiwan question. Anyway, Taiwan is not a sovereign state either. Is maybe closer to statehood than the EU, because about 10 states in the world still recognize Taiwan as a state in Latin America because they get money, and so they, in reward, they recognize Taiwan as a state. Nevertheless, there are direct air links between, for instance, Amsterdam and Taipei. And you will wonder how that could be, because now I'm going to take you to the next point, which is the bilateral air services agreement. That is the basis, the vehicle, the legal vehicle. By the way, interrupt me if I'm too fast or if you disagree with me. So everybody may come in and say, "Ooh, I don't understand what you say," or "I want to fine-tune your remarks a bit." No problem at all. Anyway, because of what I just said, aircraft can physically freely fly from one airspace to another. So from, let's say, from Thailand to Myanmar, that's your neighboring country, you won't find a border in the air. You won't find physical borders. On the ground, you have jungles, you have rivers, you have mountains. You can put your tanks, you can put defense against foreign attacks. In the air, it's very difficult. We have now the missiles, we have the drones, we can shoot at aircraft, that's true. But physically, it's not so easy to stop aircraft to fly from one airspace to another, which is why we need legal boundaries and which is why sovereignty in the air is so important. And that is why we have Article 6, which I put here on the screen. You will read it and you see how strict the language of that provision is. It starts with a no. No means thou shall not. Thou shall not fly from your country to my country unless you have special authorization, unless, and so on and so on. Unless there is an agreement between states. And I'm sure you guys here in Thailand have that too. Your air traffic control controls who is flying in your airspace. And if they see an aircraft which they can't identify, they will contact the pilot and say, what are you doing in our airspace? And if the reply from the pilot is not satisfactory, they say, please leave our airspace, go back to where you come from. If they don't, military action has to be undertaken and your military aircraft will have to supervise and what this foreign aircraft is doing. And that happened a couple of times. You maybe have heard it's a long time ago, the Korean airline 007, which was intruding what was then Soviet airspace, which was shut down because they said, what the hell are you doing here? Are you spying us? They were above spying installations in eastern part of the Soviet Union. And MH17, of course, closer to us now in terms of time, was probably, in my view, a mistake. They thought it was probably the Russian rebels or the Donetsk Republic rebels were probably thinking it was a spy aircraft. It was a military aircraft from Ukrainian military aircraft. Leaving all that aside, we focus now on Article 6, which says state-state agreement, and then you may operate your services. Now, going back to your work, the Thai Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand, you are negotiating all these agreements with outside countries like India, China, Japan, South Korea, maybe Taiwan. That's a special formula you need for that. You cannot make an agreement, I guess, with the Taiwanese Civil Aviation Authority because that would make China very angry. So you have to do it on an airport-to-airport basis, something like that. We can talk about that. You can explain it to me how you do your dealings with Taipei, but that is more or less a sidetrack, if you want to put it that way. And Indonesia and Singapore, so you make all those agreements and they establish the terms and the conditions under which pursuant to which your airlines, Thai Airways, Bangkok Airways, and so on, may fly to all those countries. And that is market access, pricing, capacity, how many aircraft, how many seats, sometimes competition, will there be competition or not, and so on and so on. We'll get to EU-ASEAN in a second. So that is a bit the broader pictures. Are you all still with me? Yeah, no questions? Well, if you want to bring in your experiences with neighboring countries and maybe with Taipei, that would be useful also for my knowledge, but if you want to leave it with that, that's also fine. because we want to proceed to the next one. In other words, states have a very dominant voice in the operation of international air services. States, and the states are represented by you guys, the civil aviation authorities of the countries. You represent, and your minister, of course, your minister of transport signs the agreement with India or with China. He or she signs that agreement, then it has to be ratified via the parliament, it has to be registered in your treaty gazette, and then it enters into force. So that is a bit how it works from a public international law perspective. And every agreement which you conclude, at least what I have seen, with a foreign country refers in the opening considerations, we are all a party to the Chicago Convention. And the Chicago Convention, as I said, is based on state. And the states and the Chicago Convention is not about economics. The Chicago Convention is about safety. Safety of it's the constitution, the safety document of international civil aviation. So it leaves the whole economic part to these agreements, the air services agreements. So that is a bit how the system works in aviation, and this is your work. If you're working in the CAAT in the safety department, you will have to know what the Chicago Convention says about the safety, the 19 annexes say about safety, have to be implemented in Thai law. On the other hand, if you work in the economic field, market access, competition, dealings with foreign countries, international relations, and so on, you have more freedom because the Chicago Convention and the annexes are silent about it. Apart from environmental protection, we'll get back to that later on this afternoon. So you do your dealings in the air services agreements according to the trade ideas which you have, of course, prepared before your negotiations with Singapore. Do we want to designate one or two or multiple airlines? Depends a bit on the competitive positions of the various airlines in the market. Singapore Airlines is a strong carrier. Thai Airways is a very strong carrier. But do we want to designate Bangkok and what is the second carrier of Singapore? Well, anyway, they have a Scoot, yes. Or do we want to go beyond that? Things like that. And do we want to create an open market? They can fly as many times as they want, and they can charge any price they want, or do we, CAAT, control that a bit? That's up to you to decide. But all those systems are possible under Article 6, because Article 6 only says the operation of international air services must be conducted by states, and states, that is you guys, the CAAT. Now, an important point is always because of the grip which states want to keep on infrastructure, being air traffic control and airports, but also airlines, ownership and control. We only want, and this point comes back in the EU-ASEAN agreement, ASEAN-EU agreement, sorry, whom are we going to designate to fly from Bangkok to Singapore, to take that as an example. Very big market, I guess, one of your biggest markets, is that true? Yeah. Yeah, Bangkok, Taipei. How many flights more or less per day would you have?
Taipei or to?
No, to
Singapore.
10?
Oh, I think more than 20.
Oh, wow. So it's nearly like a bus service, a train service. And what is your biggest market, by the way? Is that Taipei?
I would guess. I would guess Hong Kong.
Hong Kong?
Yeah.
30 flights per day. So that means
could be,
2 per hour.
Yep.
Oh, that's enormous. You know that's a train service in our country. Yeah. Hong Kong. Yeah, Hong Kong. Yeah, Hong Kong is big. Okay. Anyway, you guys decide what are we going to do with Hong Kong. Hong Kong is going via Hong Kong, but China has to put a rubber stamp on the agreement, I believe. I believe that is how it works. Now, whom am I going? We, or you guys, CAAT, designate as Thai carriers allowed to operate Bangkok, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Singapore services, Thai air carriers. But what are Thai air carriers? Carriers which are owned and controlled by Thai nationals. For the majority, ownership. Now, the ownership means ownership of the shares. Not the ownership of the fleet, not the ownership of the buildings, not the ownership of the airport, but the ownership of the shares of Thai Airways. That has to be in the hand of the state or Thai nationals. Thai Airways is for 51% or more owned by Thai nationals. Yeah?
Yep.
And so that is what you, and then the control is the management. They have to be Thai people. So that I can talk about for hours on the nationality of airlines, because you have many cases where, especially on the transatlantic and in Europe, where there were investment made in European airlines, where they said, well, are you still a European airline? Because then you can access that internal market in Europe easily. Once you are an EU air carrier, and it's a big market, people who can afford tickets. The same is for the ASEAN market. It's a huge market, of course, so everybody wants to buy into that market. But one protection measure from the countries, the ASEAN countries, is ownership or control, which is not only designations, but preceding that is licensing. You can only be designated as a Thai air carrier if you have been licensed as a Thai air carrier. And the licensing conditions say probably the same: ownership and control in Thai hands for the majority. So you can only do that, make those steps, if you have a Thai nationality, a genuine Thai nationality. If I would like to set up an airline here in Bangkok, and I would bring my own money, my own European investors, I wouldn't get a license from you because I'm not a Thai, unfortunately, but I'm not a Thai. So I would not get my license from you to operate an airline in Thailand. And I would not be able to be designated by you guys to fly from Bangkok to Chiang Mai or to Hong Kong or wherever. So that is an important point to keep in mind. Oh, sorry for that. The countries said, okay, we want to control, especially the UK, because the US, during the Second World War, it's far from you, both in terms of time and geography. But for us, geography, it was close. It happened in our countries. In terms of time, of course, it's the same. But the US was outside of it. They had their Pearl Harbor thing. But we had the devastating German attacks in those days, and we couldn't build aircraft, we couldn't build up aviation. The US could build up aviation because they were in relative peace. They had Pearl Harbor, and they came in 1944, they came and liberated Western Europe from the Germans and also a bit from the Soviets, I must say. But they could build their aircraft industry. So they said, we want to have freedom around the world to operate air services. And the UK said, yes, but we suffered a lot. Our aircraft had to be used for military purposes to destroy Germany. So we are we have to build up. So we want to be very careful with our trade in air services. We will want to build it up step by step by step, not open skies. Anyway, at a certain point, after decades, the UK, the United Kingdom, also became a mature industrial country and said, okay, now we can do open skies in the context of the US. Why did they not, and the EU, why did they not want to have an open skies with the US outside the EU? Because of Heathrow. And this is a subject which we discussed over lunch. British Airways wanted Heathrow to be closed for itself and one other carrier, which was Virgin Atlantic. They didn't want to give slots to more than one or two carriers, both on the UK side and on the US side. And there was a slot question. They said, and they could monopolize or duopolize traffic, which is very lucrative, which is very dense, like you have Bangkok, Hong Kong, London has London, New York, a very big market, a huge market. But they wanted to monopolize it, so they said, okay, no slots for more than two carriers in Heathrow. So that was not very open-minded, but that was protection of the market. And you can do that via this Article 6. The UK was entitled to do it. Okay, then the EU came in, the European Union, and the European Union was based, I have to say was based, because we now see the threats coming from other parts of the world, Russia, but especially, sorry to say that, China, not from you guys. China, which wants to buy harbors, which wants to buy airlines, which wants to buy telecom industries in Europe, and we have no defense against it. Airlines, we have the defense of the ownership, as I just mentioned. But for all the other industries which are under WTO and GATS, there are no defense mechanisms. So the EU has to be a bit more careful with that open market vision, which it always wanted to have around and preach around the world. So the EU then in this century, in the 21st century, said, okay, we are going to make deals with non-EU countries as an EU. And by the way, they always say the EU-US agreement, which looks like a bilateral air services agreement, but in international law, and I say this to you guys, my dear friends here around the table, it's a multilateral agreement because the parties are the EU, the 27 or 27 member states on the one side, and on the other side, the US. We'll come back to that later when I discuss EU, the ASEAN thing, no, the Oman thing, because there the EU wants to behave as a state, and it is not. Anyway, so here we have a multilateral agreement, EU-US, EU-Canada, and other US made open skies, EU-made or US-made open skies agreement. So in our case, the EU, it's Oman, it's Qatar, it's ASEAN, and it is Qatar, Oman, Canada, of course. Yeah, Canada. Those are the open skies agreement. Open skies means we apply a bit the trade principles of WTO. We apply competition law regimes of the two sides. We allow as many carriers as we want from the two sides, provided they are owned and controlled by the side which designates them. So that is still a restriction. And another restriction is cabotage. You cannot fly, European carriers cannot fly New York, Los Angeles, and US carriers cannot fly, let's say, Munich, Hamburg, or Madrid, Barcelona. And under the ASEAN agreement, European carriers cannot fly Bangkok, Chiang Mai. So that is local traffic which you reserve for your own carriers. That's a special subject in aviation. Now, there have been very liberal agreements outside the EU agreements. For instance, UK-Singapore is extremely liberal. And they even allow cabotage for Singapore Airlines between, let's say, London and Manchester. And Singapore Airlines doesn't use all those rights. Why? Because operationally it's too expensive to do that. And you must have the slots, you must get the slots, and you must, well, compete with UK carriers, and you must have your UK food on board, you must have UK traditions. So it's much too expensive for Singapore Airlines to operate a route inside the UK. I'll come back to that point as well. And by the way, that point is governed by Article 7 of the Chicago Convention, which was, by the way, the subject of my PhD thesis, Laling. Yeah. And so I can talk about hours on that. But normally national law says, including Thai law, will say local traffic in Thailand is reserved for Thai carriers. So if you want to fly from Bangkok to Chiang Mai or from Chiang Mai to another city in Thailand, you will always find Thai carriers. No foreign carriers will be allowed to do that, I guess. Is that true? Yeah. Then seventh freedom. Do you know what seventh freedom is? No. Seventh freedom, you know, that is another thing I didn't explain. The freedoms of the air actually are unfreedoms of the air. You have to negotiate all the freedoms through those air services agreements. Seventh freedom means for, let's say, Thai Airways, that it is allowed, and this is important for the ASEAN-EU agreement, that it is allowed to set up a hub or an establishment in, for instance, Hong Kong, and fly from Hong Kong back and forth between Hong Kong and Seoul, South Korea. That is without any connection to Bangkok. So that means that Thai Airways would station its aircraft in Hong Kong and fly back and forth from Hong Kong to Seoul without any connection with Bangkok or Chiang Mai or any other point in Thailand. And that is very rarely allowed. US air carriers, cargo air carriers, want nothing more than seventh freedom rights, because then they can, DHL and FedEx and so on, they can freely operate their cargo services around the world. So some open skies agreements allow for cargo carriers to operate flights between points which are not connected with the United States. For instance, I believe Morocco, Kazakhstan. They allow FedEx and DHL to operate flights between points in Morocco, let's say Rabat, and the capital of Kazakhstan. But that's, of course, not a big market, but it's just an example, which I have ever heard of. I'm not sure whether it is still valid, but it was valid. And seventh freedom is not often awarded, provided for in air services agreements. Sorry. Yeah. Now we are going to have a look at the ownership question, which is really a restriction for the operation of services, even in open skies agreements. Sorry for that. I should have known. Excuse me. Majority, you have to, I believe this is right. 51% has to be Thai nationals. Now, one question which sometimes comes up, what is a Thai national? If I set up a company in Thailand which has its principal place of business in Thailand, which has a Thai director, but I have set it up. Is it still a Thai company which is regarded as a Thai national in terms of ownership? You know, this is a matter for national law, not only air law, but also business law, to decide when are you a Thai corporation. The same is for the citizenship. When are you a Thai citizen? If you live here 3 months per year, I have an apartment in beautiful Bangkok where I stay 4 months per year. I have my residence permit here. I pay taxes here. Am I then a Thai national? Your law, not your air law, but your national legislation will decide that. So it looks like a very simple thing, but it is not so simple. Certain countries are very generous with providing nationality. The moment you pay, Malta, for instance, in Europe, have you heard of Malta? Small island state in the Mediterranean. If you pay, let's say, a couple of millions per year, or on a one-time basis, you get Maltese passport. And then you are Maltese national or even corporation. And you can say, I can get the traffic rights because I'm a Maltese guy. And there the European Union has said, the court in Luxembourg, no, it doesn't work like that. You must have a genuine link with the country. That's also the International Court of Justice. Very interesting fields of research, by the way. When are you a national of a country? Either as a natural person or as a corporation. And that is a very interesting subject for research. And it depends per country. Every country has its own conditions. Most countries say you must live at least 6 months plus 1 day per year in the country in order to get the nationality of the country. In Monte Carlo, you have heard of Monte Carlo? It's tiny states, a lot of tennis players live there. And the only conditions, they fly around the world to play the tournaments everywhere in the world, so they cannot stay 6 months plus 1 day in Monte Carlo, but they have as a requirement that they participate in the Monte Carlo tennis tournament. And then they are regarded as Monte Carlo citizens. Anyway, so this is a bit of a joke, of course, not for you to make note of. Yeah. And become a top player. Are you a top player in tennis? Not yet. Are you? Not yet. No. Oh, you're training to. Yeah. So that is a bit nationality. The same problem comes up with headquarters, principal place of business. I also noted in the ASEAN-EU agreement that Thai air carrier must have a principal place of business in Thailand, same for EU air carriers. But principal place of business is defined in that agreement. But in fact and in law, the principal place of business is, again, sorry to say that, a matter of national law, also in the European Union. So Germany and France have different concepts of principal place of business. And I'm 100% sure that Thailand has another definition of principal place of business than, for instance, Singapore. Every country has a different. So the question is, what is the validity of the definition in this agreement in relation to the exclusivity or the national law of ASEAN states? If the definition of principal place of business as drawn up in the EU-ASEAN agreement does not comply with the local definition, which one wins? I would say the local one, but okay. That's a matter for legal research, I would say, and discuss with you guys, what are we going to do with it when there is a conflict between the two definitions? And then effective control is also a very complicated matter. If you are 100% owner of the shares, you want to control, you want to manage a bit the airline, the undertaking, whether it be an airline or another undertaking, because you invested a lot of money in the undertaking and you want return on investment. You want your shares to create as much dividend as possible. So you say, operate as many times to the airline as you can from Bangkok to Hong Kong, to give an example. We hope, of course, that you get all your slots in Hong Kong, but that's another matter. And don't operate flights to a secondary city in China or to Amsterdam or to Oslo, because it doesn't bring money. So that is what you do. Ownership and control can be linked and are linked in practice. If you're a small investor, if you have just one share, two shares, you don't have a right to say what the airline has to do. Or I want you to buy Boeing rather than aircraft, or Airbus, or Airbus rather than Boeing, that sort of things. Now, the same or similar ownership and control exist in the EU. Now we go to principal place of business in the licensing state, the state which licenses the airline in question. So before the designation, you must be licensed. You must have the license to operate, to work as an airline, so to say. Then we get Indonesia. They have in their national law 70% ASEAN. But I asked our Lalin, our Indonesian friends, and this is just a matter of paper. Indonesia doesn't apply it. It applies in practice the Indonesian majority ownership, and the same as Thailand, and so to say. Why they have put that in law, I don't know. But and then they have again the company domicile, principal place of business. All these terms look alike. Whether they are the same, I don't know. That is a matter of national law, and they have a very special requirement that the human resource director must be Indonesian. That's a very special, I've never seen it before. Singapore has also allows 49% foreign ownership, but they have a couple of conditions which say in order to be licensed by Singapore, the CAAS, Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, you must have you must contribute to the welfare, to the economy, to the connections, to the vitality of Singapore as a state, and to the network. Yeah. Freedoms. Are you all familiar with the freedoms of the air? I suppose you were, but you are maybe not. Freedoms 1 and 2 is transit. You can fly freely through the airspace of another country and make stops there for non-traffic purposes. What are non-traffic purposes? Medical, or you need some more kerosene, or there's a technical defect which has to be repaired, or a passenger needs to be disembarked for health reasons, as you said. Now, I'm not sure what I say. There is a big international air services transit agreement. Is Thailand a party to it, or is it not? Yeah, so there are. So you allow all the operators from countries, and there are about 135, to fly through your airspace. Now, 3 and 4 are the basic of every agreement. 3 is I may carry traffic from my home state to a foreign state, and 4 is my carrier may carry traffic from the foreign state to the home state. So freedom number 3 says, Thai Airways, you may carry traffic from Bangkok to Tokyo, Japan. And 4 is Thai Airways, you may carry traffic from Tokyo, Japan to Bangkok. Yeah. The same is, of course, for passengers and cargo. 5 is a bit more complicated. 5 means Thai Airways, you may carry traffic from Bangkok to Tokyo via Seoul. And in Seoul, you make a stop and may pick up traffic in Seoul and bring it to Tokyo. But it has to be on a continuous service, Bangkok, Seoul, Tokyo. Are you all still with me, or is this becoming a bit complicated or too much? I must put my glasses. You have a question?
No.
Is that okay?
It's okay. Okay. No, please ask questions, because we are now, yes, we are now in the single air transport market of ASEAN. So you have unrestricted freedoms, unrestricted operations for 3, 4, and 5th freedom. 6 and 7s are not exchanged. So 6 is what Singapore does, what Middle East carriers do, what Turkish Airlines does, what KLM does. And what is 6 freedoms? 6 freedoms, and maybe Thai probably too, Thai Airways, via the home country of the carrier. So let's say Emirates picks up traffic in Delhi, brings it to Dubai, its main hub, and from Dubai, you transfer as a passenger to a service to, let's say, London in the UK. And that is their business model, because they have very small home markets, a couple of millions only, 3 millions. And they're geographically nicely located. So you fly through a foreign hub to another destination. KLM started this because we have a very small home market, a good airport, a good carrier, and we are, the Netherlands is nicely located on the edge of Europe, direction North America. So US, Mexico, and Canada. And 7th freedom, I already mentioned. You left that outside of the ASEAN agreement, internal agreement. Cabotage as well. And in Europe, all this is unrestricted. You can fly whatever you want. So if you are a Dutch carrier, no, if you are a French carrier, you can fly between Madrid and Barcelona. If you're a German carrier, you can fly between Milan and Rome, and so on and so on. Even more so, if you have, and this is a very important point now for the next slides, under the ASEAN-EU agreement, if you have an establishment as an airline in another city in Europe, you have all the rights to fly from there, both internally and externally. Now, the next question becomes, what is an establishment? When does Lufthansa have an establishment in Rome? You have an establishment in Rome if you have a continuous corporate business presence in another city. So you must have an office there, you must have people working there. It is not enough to have just a guy or girl at the airport checking whether all the flights are coming in time or too late, or you must have a sort of a business unit in another country. And then you can fly. Now, I have to give now the European examples because you don't have that freedom of establishment in the ASEAN regime. If Lufthansa has an establishment in Rome, it may fly from Rome to Madrid, from Rome to Milan, domestic, from Rome to Amsterdam, from Rome to Copenhagen, but also from Rome to Bangkok. Why would you not find a flight from Lufthansa, operated by Lufthansa, Rome, Bangkok? You will not fly. If you look here Thai airport and you want to fly to a European destination, if you want to fly to Frankfurt or Munich, it will be Thai Airways or Lufthansa. If you want to fly to France, you will find Thai Airways, Air France. You will not find Lufthansa flying Bangkok, Paris. Why is that? Although legally it is allowed, at least from the European side, because operationally it is too expensive and too complicated to set up your business as Lufthansa, for instance, in Rome, get slots there, compete with the local carriers, i.e. the Italian and the Bangkok and the Thai carriers, and try to get into that market. It's too costly. So it is a legal creature of the European Union. Why do I say this? Because sometimes, and we see that the European Union is very strong in creating legal patterns, legal devices, legal vehicles. Whether they work in practice is very much another question. And I have the same doubts, and sorry to anticipate a bit the ASEAN-EU agreement. That's a beautiful agreement on paper. Whether and how it will work in practice is very much another question. Sorry to cast doubt on it. The Europeans are very proud. The Commission, we did it. I say, wait and see how it works. And the same is true with EU-Qatar. Germany wants to get out of EU-Qatar. They say there are far too many rights, so we want to, that's a big problem. EU-ASEAN, EU-Oman, we'll talk about that later. Now, so you don't have freedom of establishment in the ASEAN market. Your ASEAN regime does not allow your companies to establish themselves in another ASEAN countries, like Singapore. So your company doesn't have a right of establishment, your airlines at least, a right of establishment in Singapore or in Indonesia. Let's take Indonesia because it's a bigger country. So Thai Airways is not allowed to establish itself in Jakarta and operate from there, from Jakarta, to Singapore, to Myanmar, to Brunei, and to Denpasar on Bali. So that is a big difference, which also reflects on the ASEAN-EU agreement, because it unlevels the playing field. European carriers have, at least in law, an advantage which you guys don't have. You can only operate from your own country to other countries, including European countries. You cannot say, Thai Airways, now I'm going to open services from Singapore to Frankfurt. You cannot do that. That's not allowed. You're not a Singapore carrier, and you don't have freedom of establishment. So that stops it. Are you all still with me? It's not so easy, but I hope you understand it. For me, that freedom of establishment, it's a beautiful concept for intra-European purposes, but not for services or trade relations outside the EU. For intra-EU, it's very good. You can, as a telecom company in Germany, you can have an establishment in France and can try to get into the French market with your establishment. That's fine, because the rules are similar. We have similar rules from the EU. But outside, it doesn't work. Point. It simply doesn't work. And aviation is very much a global business, so that whole freedom of establishment has to be seen, considered under a very different angle, if you want to look at it from a global perspective. And the more as we are not WTO. So we have our own trade principles laid down in the air services agreements, and they don't refer to establishment. Freedom of... Yes, please.
I have a question on what you just mentioned about the Thai carrier flying from Singapore to Frankfurt, for example, right? But if you do it from the context of fifth freedom,
yes,
we can do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're talking about like setting up.
No, I exactly. If Thailand and Singapore have an air services agreement providing for fifth freedom rights for your carriers, i.e. Thai Airways, to fly fifth freedom rights beyond Singapore, whether that be Seoul or Frankfurt, doesn't matter, then you are entitled to do it, subject to approval from the country to which you fly, i.e. Germany or Republic of Korea. No, that's absolutely true. But that is still in the air services agreement. I'm now going in the market situation and try to say, what can you do inside a market? And this market, the ASEAN single air transport market, sorry to say that, is a bit a paper market. It gives certain rights, but in practice, we know that. We read the same things as you read. There are so many disparities between the ASEAN countries. Singapore, very small, but wants to have as much traffic as it can everywhere. A strong carrier, strong airport, so they want to intrude all those markets. Indonesia says, why should we need that? We have 100 million people, we have 1,000 islands, we are nearly a continent in ourselves, a market on our own. We are not that much interested. There is also, of course, economic development differences, which are huge in, as I understand it. There are the very wealthy ASEAN countries and the poorer ASEAN countries. You have that in Europe too, but less so. You have the very rich northern countries and the somewhat less richer. There's not a big difference. Northern Italy is as rich as Northern Europe, but Sicily is going into, sorry to say that, Africa. But don't quote me. This is not true. No, but it's a beautiful country, Sicily, and I exaggerate a little bit. It's not so much economic welfare, but it's more the politics. It's a bit chaotic politics. It's not streamlined politics. But no, and Spain, by the way Spain was developed it's quite impressive. But anyway, so the level playing field inside the European Union is the playing field in the European Union is much more leveled than it is in, and I believe Brunei is a small state but extremely rich, as I understand it, because of the oil. I've never been to Brunei, but I imagine you have everything there what you need, and it looks probably like Dubai, I guess.
Probably.
Yeah. Anyone has ever been to Brunei? You. Tell us, share your experiences.
It's like Singapore.
It's like Singapore.
Very modern.
Yeah.
And Royal Brunei Airlines has very far reach. I think it fly to Europe as well.
What does Brunei Airlines fly? They don't fly big international.
Oh yeah, they fly.
Yeah, they do.
They fly long haul. They have wide body.
Okay.
They have wide bodies. I think I've flown the. I think I'm not quite sure. It was Dreamliner. I can't remember. It was a Boeing, but it flies intercontinental routes.
How many people live in Brunei? Same as Singapore?
I think less. Much less. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They fly to London.
Yeah. Now I want to make a remark on slots. I noticed that I mentioned that a couple of times, and the slot questions, and it comes back in other discussions. Now there are countries which say we do in the air services agreements the traffic rights, i.e. the freedoms of the air. 1, 2, that's operational, the transit agreements, and 3, 4, and 5 are the economic freedoms of the carriage of traffic. 6, 7, 8 we leave outside. So that is economic. What can you carry? And which prices, which aircraft? All that. That's the traffic rights. But most countries say we trade traffic rights, but to get your slots, you must be in the other countries. We don't care. We, CAAT, do not deal with slots. KLM wanted to fly to Narita in Japan. And the Japanese authorities said, KLM, or the Netherlands, CA, you can get as many traffic rights as you want, but slots, you have to be in Tokyo at Narita Airport. Try to get them from Narita Airport. Now, there is one state in the world which sees that differently. Do you know which state that is? Which says, no, if we have the traffic rights, you, foreign country, must give us the slots to operate the traffic rights. That's different from what I just said. You understand the difference, huh? No, you're very close. The US. The US says, once I have the traffic rights under an open skies agreement, I want the slots. Now, this happened to the Netherlands, that's why. And this happens quite a bit, regularly. And I must say, from an international law perspective, I understand the US position. I'll explain you in a second why. First, the history. In 1992, the first open skies agreement was concluded between the US and the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a bit like Singapore, a small country, not as small. We have 18 million people, but we are small. Economically, okay, fine, important trade country, all that, but small. One carrier, one airport, that is it. We don't have much more to offer. Yeah, we have Rotterdam, but that's small. And the US has 70 airports size of Amsterdam. So they say, okay, we do open skies, but we want to be sure that all our airlines can fly as many times as they want to Amsterdam, because you only offer one airport, Amsterdam. And we offer New York, Baltimore, Denver, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Boston, and so forth, Miami, and so forth, and so forth. Big, big, big airports, big catchment areas. So you can make a lot of money there. You know how they speak to. You can make a lot of money there. But open skies mean for us, if we have the traffic rights, we get the slots at Amsterdam Airport. You cannot say, no, we don't have slots available, which from an economic and commercial perspective, I already very well understand from the American side, at least in the Dutch case, because we don't have much to offer. So we must offer at least the traffic rights plus the ribbon around it, the slots. Then that was 1992. The airports, Amsterdam was not yet slot congested in 1997. Slot congested. So they said to the Americans, there were new airlines which wanted to fly. So difficult. No, we don't have the slots. I'm sorry. You have to ask the slot coordinator and you have to file. You have to apply for slots. And maybe you get them, maybe you don't. American, of course, were furious because they said open skies for us means, and we have that agreement, international law, traffic rights means traffic rights plus the slots. So they had to find all kinds of formulas in order to keep the Americans happy. And that subject come back and come back. Now, why do I understand the American position? And I must say, in all honesty, I understand the American position from an air law perspective, not from what they now do in trade. The current trade policy, I think, is madness. But okay, the import tariffs and so on, that's ridiculous what they are doing. But from an aviation perspective, I've always understood the American position. And that's not because I admire the Americans. No, I don't admire the Americans. But in aviation law, if I admire a country, it's America because they know the rules, ICAO, Chicago Convention, Air Service Agreements, but also Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, because the principal asset of the Air Service Agreement is traffic rights. How can airlines operate from A to B? That's traffic rights. And all the rest is subject to traffic rights. That is something, and the Vienna Convention says the principal object of the treaty should always be respected. Now, the principle. So I have said to the Dutch, negotiate your counterparts in Holland, the CA people, if there were ever to be a mediation or arbitration between the US and the Netherlands or on traffic rights and slots, I'm not sure whether I could be on the Dutch side. I would be, as a lawyer, more on the American side. I find that there's something to be said for their line of arguments, and not only in the traffic rights slots discussion, overlooked, of course, by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, but also in other files like the noise hindrance. The Americans were right. We couldn't do it. I said that from day one to the minister. Stop your noise hindrance thing in the Netherlands. You are going to lose. And they lost, of course. And the Americans were right. But okay, we are not going to talk about noise hindrance now. Well, we have already said quite a bit about this. The EU has those strong supranational bodies, so strong that they say, we are like a state. And that is a bit the problem. And by the way, sir, you'll get my slides. You don't have to make pictures. But you may make pictures of beautiful Aline, or beautiful Dr. Pawat. Sorry, that was too personal, or was that allowed? So they believe that they are now becoming a state, so they can behave as a state. So they say EU-ASEAN. But the actual parties are the states, both on the ASEAN side and on the EU side. And so it's a big multilateral agreement after all. With how many ASEAN states are there? 12? 10. So it's 27 states plus 2 organizations, 1 intergovernmental, 1 supranational. Supranational means there are a couple of supranational institutions, i.e. the Commission, the European Parliament and the Court, and they can dictate states what to do to a certain extent. We are not going into that too much. We have an EU air carrier, which is not only a legal concept, but also practical. If you're an EU air carrier, you can fly everywhere in Europe, and you can fly from point in Europe, provided you have an establishment there, to points outside of Europe, subject to approval from the other states. I can talk for hours about it, because I'm approaching my end time, but I will finish this if you allow. You are my master of ceremony. Do you want me to stop now?
No.
Yeah. ASEAN community carrier is more like a legal concept. It's still an air carrier of a member state. Why is that? Because you still rely on ownership and control in your licensing conditions. So you will not be able to, I guess, or maybe you are able to, or you will not be inclined to designate Singapore Airlines to fly from Bangkok to Madrid, because that is still your market. Am I correct there? Mm-hmm. Whereas, at least from a legal point of view, this is possible on the European side, which is creating disparity. Reason why, by the way, the Brazil didn't want to have an agreement, although it's a massive continent, nearly as big, if it's not bigger in Europe, an agreement with the EU, because they said too much competition with EU air carriers. They can fly from everywhere in the European Union to Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, whatever places there are. And we have a limited number of carriers. They have 20 big carriers on the European side. We have 3 or 4. And they will absorb the whole market. So that is why Brazil said, we don't want to deal with the EU as such. And that's a choice which you have made already. You said, okay, we do it. I'm not quite sure whether you were so eager to do it, but you did it. Maybe as under pressure of Singapore But is Singapore so powerful that it can dictate the ASEAN aviation policy? I don't know. That is for me difficult to see. I understand Singapore. I understand why they want it. Very well, very understandable. I also understand why Indonesia is hesitant. I hear in Europe that Thailand would be in favor of EU-ASEAN because tourism, a lot of freedom for airlines from Europe, bringing in all those tourists to your beautiful country. So there is a lot of variation to be seen inside the ASEAN community, so to say, which you don't see on the European side. One of the big policy ideas behind ASEAN EU was, of course, to capture a part of the Middle East market. To say, instead of flying Bangkok, Dubai, Madrid, we fly now Bangkok, Madrid directly. But you could do that even without ASEAN EU. You can do that anyway. But it will maybe take away, because I see not only here, but also in India, they are a bit saying, why should Indian people fly through Dubai to Europe or to Africa or to the US? Why should they do that? We can do that ourselves. So India is improving its infrastructure, its airports, and its airlines like Air India, but especially Indigo. Have you heard of Indigo? It's getting bigger, bigger, and they really want, they're now already flying to Europe. And they didn't do that till last year, this year actually. And they tried to tell the Indians, listen guys, why should you fly through Dubai? We also have our own aircraft, airline people and so on. You can fly direct, non-stop, rather than through Emirates. So that is a bit the point. Secondary points, there will probably not be much direct services between Chiang Mai and Marseille in France. It is open, you can do it. Thai Airways may fly Chiang Mai, Marseille, but not enough traffic. Low-cost carriers, low cost is not so much freedoms of the air, of a right problem, but you know, low cost is very different from the flag carrier. The flag carrier has thanks to you guys, the tradition of how do we deal with foreign destinations. We go to our Civil Aviation Authority, we say, we now want to fly to Maldives or we want to fly to Auckland and New Zealand. We see a market there, please make a deal. And you know how to, the big airline, like in your case, Thai Airways, know how to, has that experience, has that tradition of establishing itself in a foreign country with sales offices, with people, technical people. Remittance of currency is an important point. Venezuela is now a big problem for many carriers because they sell their tickets in Venezuela, but the earnings will not be transferred to the country, let's say Germany, to Lufthansa, because the Venezuelan government says that money stays here. So they are losing money there. So they stop services. But you must have all that background. What are the problems of all those, of flying internationally, political and economically, financially, and so on. And another point, low-cost carriers normally operate smaller aircraft, and they don't always have the long-haul aircraft to fly from Bangkok to, let's say, Stockholm, and get acquainted with the local circumstances there. It's now freezing like hell in northern Scandinavia, and you are here in a lovely warm country. So all that also plays a role. That's a whole way of thinking which you must build up, both as CAA people and as airline people, flag carrier people. So Indigo has now a couple of people in service, and I know them well, who have a lot of experience in traveling to Canada, to Europe, to Thailand, and they know exactly what to do when they want to make a deal, an air services agreement. Well, what is the principal parcel of the EU-ASEAN? Of course, the transit agreement, but as Professor Lalin already said, we are party to it, so you don't need the ASEAN agreement, the International Air Service Agreement for the transit rights. The gain would be third and fourth freedom. But third and fourth freedom you already have via your air services agreement. The only thing is you get maybe more traffic from Europe because they can fly from all these points in Europe to Thailand. But that will I also try to find a Dutch word for this. That will confront Thai Airways with a lot of competition from the European side. As the Brazilians said, we don't want all that competition from the European side. Whereas your market is in essence will stay the Thai market. It will not become the ASEAN market, I guess. It's too fragmented still. It's not legally solid. It's not policy-wise solid. It's not economically solid. So what is the big thing for you guys in it? You get maybe massive tourists here. That's a good thing. You get all those English out. You get the Norwegians. It's European Aviation Economic Area, but okay, they can take part. The Swedes, the Danes, the Germans, the Spanish, the Italians. You can get all those people smoothly into your country, which is money for you, for the economy, for trade, for business. But Thai Airways has to compete. So I would find it difficult to make a statement because it's more an economic rather than a legal problem. But the legal and the air policy problem translates in an economic problem. And yeah, you can go through all these freedoms, of course. 3 and 4 is, of course, always the basis. And 5, it has not yet entered into force because it goes to ratification procedure. Now you have 37 states which have to ratify it. And it is provisionally applied, I know. But have you seen Singapore Airlines flying from Bangkok now under the provisional application from Bangkok? Because if I were Singapore Airlines, the first city I would look at would be Bangkok. Because big market, wealthy people, closer to Europe, Bangkok, Frankfurt. Can you fly Singapore Airlines, Bangkok, Frankfurt now? Either on a fifth freedom basis or on a designation basis, establishment basis. I don't think so.
In the past, Singapore used to fly Singapore, Bangkok, Tokyo. That's in the past.
On a fifth freedom basis.
On a fifth freedom basis.
But at the moment now we are talking about ASEAN EU. They are not flying Bangkok to Amsterdam or Frankfurt or Paris or one of the major hubs in Europe. Although they theoretically could, I guess. And this is the same going back to the EU-US agreement. There were airlines in Europe which said, now we can fly outside of our home country to the US. So British Airways was still a European country, an EU country, set up an airline in Paris, and it was British Airways Continental Europe, I'd forgotten the name, and flew Paris-Boston. And Air France set up an airline in London, flew London, Philadelphia. All done. Legally possible, operationally too expensive. I used slots, competing in a domestic market which is not yours. Thai people want to fly Thai Airways because you see the charming Thai stewardesses, you get your Thai food, you get your Thai culture on board. It's part of your territory, more or less, the aircraft. Legally, sometimes, there's one convention which says an aircraft is part of the territory of a state. That's a Rome Convention of 1952. Yeah, but anyway, that's another point. So I say no, culturally. So, yeah, what you can do, there's one point which I forgot, and maybe I should finish then, but I'll see whether there are still slides left. What you can do here, what is practiced here in this region, is that an airline, a gentleman, says in Kuala Lumpur, Mr. Fernandez, I set up Air Asia, is a Malaysian company, but I set up daughter companies in India, in Thailand, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and so on. And according to the local rules, and I have been consulted a couple of times by India, by other countries, can you tell us whether Air Asia, daughter company in, let's say, India, still comply with ownership and control, with the nationality rules? And then you have to go into what are the nationality criteria of India, citizens, natural persons, corporations, blah, 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 all that. But that is a bit a system which works here. And in Latin America, LATAM has also all those daughter companies in various Latin American states. So that is how you try to avoid, how you try to implement maybe the freedom of establishment. You just create, not you, but Thailand doesn't do that, but Air Asia does it. Instead of using a freedom of establishment, which they don't have, they set up daughter companies, but they must be licensed in the other country and they must comply with ownership and control and principal place of business criteria. So that is another way to deal with that restriction. Yeah. Yeah, the joint committee. There were questions about the joint committee. Fair competition, yes, that's very much a European thing. Europe doesn't like state aid. They say, no, we have a market, so states should stay out of the market. The Europeans say to, for instance, Qatar Airways, we are not competing with Qatar Airways, but with the state of Qatar because it's sitting on that airline. Joint committee is working well in the EU-US context. It's very much an EU thing again. They have in all their trade agreements, they have joint committees. It comes from the EU trade agreements. And in air services agreements, you guys know that better than me, you don't have a joint committee, but you have consultations and negotiations. So the moment you have a problem with slots, with pricing, with distribution channels, whatever you have in the other country, in Tokyo or in Brunei, you go to the the CAA in Brunei or in Tokyo and say, listen, we want slots, we want selling offices, we want maintenance facilities, God knows what. Let's talk about it. Consultations, negotiate it. We may have to adapt our agreement. The EU says, no, we do it via a joint committee. The consultations and the negotiations. So they had the Air Norwegian, in the EU-US context, the Air Norwegian point. Air Norwegian is a Norwegian company which had set up an airline in Ireland and flew from Dublin to points in the US. And then the US said, no, you are a flag of convenience, you're not really an Irish carrier. And that was discussed, not solved, but discussed in the joint committee. The noise hindrance at Schiphol, at the Amsterdam airport, discussed in the joint committee. That sort of things they discussed there. Seventh freedom rights for cargo carriers. Can we expand that a bit? or things like that, or slots in Madrid. Our carriers don't catch slots in Madrid airport. Things like that are discussed in the joint committee, and the way I understand it, it's quite successful. Now, environment, this is always a surprise for me to see that in all those EU agreements, the EU ETS is never mentioned or touched upon in the trade agreements. Because you guys always stick to CORSIA, and which I believe is a good thing. Labor relations, maybe not a big point with ASEAN states, but was a big thing with Qatar, because Qatar is very flexible, let's put it nicely, with labor relations. In order to be steward or stewardess in Qatar Airways, you must be young and handsome, 26 till 29. Girls have to sign an agreement that they don't get pregnant. So all that is doesn't sit very easy with labor laws of the World Labor Organization. Now, as to EU-Oman, it's going very slowly, the ratification process. The way I see it's provisionally applied. I don't know what that means in practice, whether indeed some airlines are benefiting from the rights which are granted under the agreement, like Thai Airways flying now from Hanoi to Rome. I don't think so, but okay, maybe that's the case. And indeed, the EU-Oman case can shed a light on it. And the EU-Oman case, I want to be very brief on it, because it is all anticipating. I had thought that the advisory opinion of the Advocate General would have been made public now, but it hasn't made public yet. It has not yet been published. But in very short, the EU Commission says we are now a state, more or less, which they are not, under international law. And so we have to deal exclusively with other countries, which means we, EU, are going to make an exclusive deal with Oman without the member states. And what that means for EU-ASEAN, you guys have to agree with that. Whether you agree with that, it will bring you in a very delicate position, economically, but also financially, but also legally, because the Chicago Convention says operation of air services goes via states. And the Chicago Convention also says all agreements in Article 87 or something, all agreements which are not complying with the provisions of this agreement concluded by our member states, i.e. the 193 states, are null and void. Or no one may conclude an agreement which goes against the provisions of this agreement. If Thailand would agree, and there I would be on the Thai side, to tell you the truth, would say, I don't accept the EU as a state because for economic reasons, for financial reasons, for operational reasons, but in my case, also for legal reasons, I would be on your side because I said, Thailand, you are right. You deal with states. And that the EU acts next to states is fine. That is accepted, as ASEAN does. But there are still your states, ASEAN states, and EU member states, which have the final authority on the safety, on the security, on environmental things, and so on and so on. It will become highly complex if you agree to exclusive components of the EU. Another thing which we didn't discuss is security. As you all know, the air services agreements also include a couple of provisions on security. Tokyo Convention, Montreal Convention, sabotage, unruly passengers on board, hijacking of aircraft, dangerous acts on board aircraft, all that. That's criminal law. Even in the EU, criminal law is a matter of the member states, not of the EU. Exclusive member states, criminal law. Civil law is exclusive member states. We'll get back to that tomorrow at the passenger regulation. But criminal law, and the EU can never access the Tokyo Convention, the Montreal Convention, the Beijing Convention, all those criminal law conventions. They cannot, unless you guys and everybody agrees to change them, which will not happen overnight, which will nobody to agree to. But they are part of the agreement. They are part of your EU-ASEAN agreement. So how do you deal with that? I asked that because I was asked by the flag carriers to write a legal opinion. I said, legally, I don't see how it has to work. Third states have to agree with it, and they're going to be in conflict with the Chicago Convention, rights and obligations. You put them in an awkward position. They have to think about how are we going to deal with it, and that is sitting in Luxembourg, my legal opinion on this case. They know it, and that it will be extremely challenging to agree to exclusive competence, apart from a couple of European law hurdles which have to be taken before you can do that. But I won't annoy you with that. So Laline said in the car, Professor Laline said in the car very kindly this morning, maybe you can come back next year. Yes, maybe. And if there is a decision, I would love to share it with you and discuss it with you. How are you going to look? I already did that with Indians, and Indians said, we are not going to agree to that. We are not going to agree to exclusive competence. My hope, and this is not to be recorded, my hope would be that you wouldn't agree to that either and not make concessions. We agree if we get slots in Madrid, or slots in Frankfurt, or freedom of establishment in Amsterdam, God knows what. Make it a principal point and say we stay loyal to the Chicago Convention. The Chicago Convention says it's operation of international air services, Article 6, is a state business. Point. EU, sorry for you, you're not a state. Just tell them that. You're not a state. I don't see you as a ratifying party under the Chicago Convention. Here is the website of ICAO. I don't see you there. Where are you? Sorry, I'm horrible, I know. It's my own continent. It's not the first time I'm arguing against my own continent. In the EU ETS, I was on the non-EU side. And I got them as far as, may I tell this story, how it went? The EU ETS, you know what the EU ETS is, Emission Trade Scheme. They wanted to export their trade scheme to outside countries. In other words, not CORSIA, which is the ICAO system, but an EU regime. And in 2007, the consultants of a Dutch environmental company based in Delft, a small city in Holland, asked me to give a legal opinion on it. And because the EU Commission had asked that environmental company to write a report on the scope of the EU ETS, only intra-Europe or also to third countries. Europe, the Commission wanted to include the whole world in it. In other words, if you fly from Tokyo to Brussels or from Boston to London, the UK was still a member of the EU at that time, or from Los Angeles to Paris, you are subject to EU rules. Now, I said, no, you can't do that because the Chicago Convention proceeds from the sovereignty of the states. In other words, if you fly from Singapore through Thailand, Thai airspace via transit agreement rights, to Rome, you fly through Thailand, but the EU said, okay, then Singapore Airlines, while flying through Thailand, transit, is subject to our rules, our European rules. Are you still with me? I said, you can't do that. We proceed from state sovereignty, national jurisdiction. You can't do that. And then the Delft company said, where does it say so? I said, that's Article 1 of the Chicago Convention, Article 2, Article 11, and Article 12. And then they said, well, can you do something about it? I said, well, maybe via Article 12. They said, local navigation rules apply in EU member states, but only EU member states. You can say navigation rules include environmental rules, but not more than that. And navigation rules as established by the state in which the navigation rules are supposed to apply. And then they said to me, can we delete out of the Chicago Convention the words in the state, in the national airspace of the state in question? I said, no, because it's in the convention. I can't delete those words. We are lawyers, so we can't do that. I can't scratch words from a convention. They said, well, we will do it in the report. I said, you do it in the report, but strike through my name in the report. I can't have that. So they went with their advice to Commission. This is how it works in Brussels. Went with their advice of that company to Brussels and said, here's the report. We can apply the European rules for all those flights, Singapore via Thailand to Rome, from Tokyo via Russia at that time, to Warsaw, and so on and so on. Fine. So they make a directive. US, of course, always the first, and they are right again. They were extremely, totally right, said, we are going to argue against it. They brought the case to the European Court. They lost it. And that's the European Court. The European Court will never, ever allow international law to prevail over European law. And that's a very dangerous attitude, I find, especially for us in aviation. We'll come back to it tomorrow in the passenger rights thing. But at the same time, so they lost their case. I went at that time, I had a good friend who he was Director General of the CAAC, the Civil Aviation Authority of China, Hangzhou. And he said, Pablo, you have to come and visit me. So I went to China. I spoke to him, and he said to me, what do you think? EU ETS, is that legally okay? I said, no, legally is absolutely not okay. I'm totally against it, and from a legal point of view. And then I left. I went to Qatar. I had another meeting in Qatar, in Doha. And the week after I left Beijing, the Chinese air carriers wrote a letter to Airbus. If you continue with your EU ETS directive, extending the scope to the whole of the world, we will cancel all our Airbus purchases. And then the French president, Hollande, he was a socialist, was a bit shocked. He said, oh my God, what do I have to do now? Because I'm going to lose. Because not only the Chinese, but also the Middle East carriers said the same. If you continue, we're going to Boeing and not to Airbus. Which means losses of jobs in France and Toulouse, where Airbus is manufactured. So he was getting very nervous, and he called the president of the European Commission, Barroso, the Portuguese guy, said, get rid of that damned directive for outside of Europe, because we are in trouble here. We are really in serious trouble politically and economically, labor law-wise, and so on and so on. So that is when the stop the clock device was installed, and they said, we are only going to apply EU ETS to inside Europe. And next year, 2026, they're going to see whether they can still apply it to outside Europe, but they're going to examine that. But I find it a very dangerous. And by the way, if you look at that directive, it's still there. We can apply this irrespective of national boundaries. It's still, so the council, the states also have slept. But okay, I've told enough now. Sorry for your, all these, but I want to tell you, I mean, I started with it. This is the eagerness of the EU to be on the aviation platform, which is a sexy platform. Let's be clear on that. Everybody wants, because it's law, it's policy, it's diplomacy, it's commerce, it's economics, it's technique, it's a bit of everything. So it's a sexy business, if I may pronounce that word here. Yeah. And so it's an attractive business, and lucky you're in it. And they want to take their part in it, and very eager to say, here we are with our regulations. You know, they do that with the US all the time, and digital regulations and all kind of financial regulations. We control, sometimes are very good things. I don't want to make everything bad, but sometimes they are a bit too eager. And next year, if it goes wrong with the decision, I'm going to make a journey through Asia, and I'm going to say, don't accept it. My mission, I will be a missionary for international law. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Pablo, for your insightful remarks. Actually, you may notice that Lalin and I have been very silent. We did it on purpose because we want you to hear from the world-renowned experts here. So you can contact us anytime, in Thailand.
Me too.
Yeah, but we agreed that we would like to give the floor mainly to Professor Pablo. I think, are there any questions from the floor? If not, if I may.
You can speak Thai now. I understand that. If you want to speak in Thai,
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, just going back to your statement on Singapore, what do you call it?
Singapore, Frankfurt.
The factor, the power of Singapore influences. I've heard many years ago that Singapore has signed bilateral agreement, open sky bilateral agreement with a lot of major powers. And you mentioned about UK.
Yeah.
And I think they signed with the US, Canada, Australia, everything. Now, if and when AEC, open skies policy will come to fruition in the future, will that kind of Singaporean bilateral agreement with everybody create a kind of backdoor of foreign airlines and all the aviation industry coming into the ASEAN airspace, and basically, through Singapore, very liberal business practice, can create a lot of major foreign-owned companies operate under the Singaporean flag, so to speak, into the ASEAN.
Yeah, but
can it be done?
It's already on. Do you mean that a U.S. air carrier, let's take a concrete example, Delta Airlines, may establish itself in Singapore and fly and
right, through bilaterals with Singapore. So technically or legally, I'm not quite sure. I'm not a lawyer. So Delta Airlines can establish Delta Singapore and flies to Chiang Mai, fly to Phuket.
Yeah, but I don't think there's a freedom of establishment for US airlines or UK airlines in Singapore. They must indeed set up a daughter company. And I believe that Singaporean licensing conditions are framed in such a fashion that it will be very hard for a non-Singaporean entity, the way it's framed. I quoted it on one of the slides. You must have stimulate the Singaporean network, something like that, and the Singaporean economy. And by the way, there's another thing which plays a role, which I didn't go into because it's a very interesting but also very complex question. You have to compete for traffic rights. And they have a traffic rights committee in Singapore. So if you want to fly from Singapore to Chiang Mai as a Delta Airlines daughter company, should that already be possible, you must look whether there's room for another Singaporean carrier under the Singapore-Thailand carrier. And if there is such room, if there's no, if it's an open, do you have an open skies with Singapore? Or is it limited designation?
I don't think with Singapore, I'm not quite sure. I think the legal people made.
Because we also have the ASEAN agreement with our ASEAN member, we can utilize that as well.
Yeah. The ASEAN will apply. The ASEAN will apply. So that's unlimited 3 and 4. But I think the big problem will be the first step, the Singaporean carrier. That's number one. Number two is the contribution for the licensing to the Singaporean network. I think there will be a lot of hesitation there on the Singaporean side. And as to the, that was not part of your question. ASEAN agreement says that the ASEAN-EU agreement will prevail over all bilaterals which are currently in force between ASEAN countries like Thailand, Singapore, Myanmar, and so forth, and the European countries, unless those agreements, bilateral agreements, are more liberal than the EU-ASEAN. So if they provide for more extensive fifth freedom rights or even seventh freedom rights, then those will be unaffected. That's how I understood it.
Maybe, okay, from Kat.
Let me mention the topic you already talk about, the effective control. So currently, like, how EU carriers define the effective control? Like in Thailand, like some company, they have like a lot of level. When they set up airlines company, sometimes they have like the offshore company lying in second tier or third tier. Currently, like in Thailand, we maintain 51%, like first tier, 51% Thai company. But under that Thai company, which already own 51%, maybe there's like another 49% of the foreigner. So when we combine together, maybe the effective control of the foreigner may be greater than 49%.
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting question too. Effective control is, and as I said, sometimes linked to the ownership of the shares, because if you have the more shares you have, the more control you want to exercise for your return of investment. Effective control is defined in EU Regulation 1008/2008. In the licensing conditions, you will find one. But effective control is also very much a factual question. How can you know who really takes decisions in a company, in an airline? Who is the ultimate decision-making power? I'll give you a couple of examples. Under US law, they had at a certain point the Dateweiler case. And Dateweiler was the man, you had a US airline called Air Florida or something, was nicely established, incorporated in Florida, and US governors, US managers, US shares, everything was all right. But you go up, you climb the corporate tree, and then you see that Air Florida was owned by a mother company, and the mother company was owned by a mother company, grandmother company, and the grandmother company was owned by a great-grandmother company, and at the great-grandmother company was managed by a Swiss person, Mr. Dateweiler, and he was managing all those companies in the tree. Can you understand this? So then the US Civil Aviation Authority said, I'm not going to give you a license because you're not effectively controlled by US citizens. Another example is the Middle East carriers. We ask ourselves in Europe, are you effectively controlled by Dubai, Qatar Airways, or Emirates, or the Abu Dhabi carrier, which Etihad, because we see their New Zealand guy, Australian guy, a Norwegian or a Dutch or a German guy, who's the CEO. So that is the the chief executive officer who's effectively controlling the company. But then we learned that behind the Western, so to say, CEOs, there is the sheikh who tells this and this and this has happened. You're just a puppet on a string. You see what I mean? The puppet is the Western guy, and the string is held by the local sheikh or the local sheikhs, and they tell the airline what to do. You're just executives of the local sheikh. You don't have that much executive power. That's what we hear. Now we have Air France KLM, and you ask yourself, how come that KLM is effectively controlled by Dutch citizens? At the moment, they have 4 directors in the board, all of them 100% Dutch. They have ownership, and I happen to be a major shareholder in KLM, not privately but professionally, holding 37% of the Dutch shares, the KLM shares. I'm Dutch, so that's okay. But then the question is, in Paris, there are discussions how to deal with pilots who want some more wage, slots have to be dealt with, and things like that. Who has the decisive voice there? We don't know. We may think that Air France, which bought KLM, that they have a decisive say, but we don't know that. So effective control is very much a factual matter too. Who is really taking the decision? What is the nationality? And so forth and so forth. So it's a very, as I said, complex concept, both from an international law point of view and from a domestic law point of view. When are you a national of the United States, of Monte Carlo, of Thailand? And what is your effective power in the company? The last point is very difficult to find out because we don't read the records of the meetings in Paris or in Dubai. We don't read them. We don't get to see them. They're behind closed doors. So that is effective control, makes it very difficult to attack it.
I have an observation based on the last question. If I were to get your opinion. From your case, you mentioned about KLM and Air France, right? Or IAG and Iberia, all those. Those they have different brands. Yes. They have different image entirely. So from the outsider looking in, it's a complete 2 different companies, right? But when we have, for the lack of the better word, franchise airlines, which the brands, the logo, the image, everything of the daughter airlines is exactly the same with the mother airlines. The fleet decision, right? It'll be single fleet only for the entire network. That is very obvious, in my view, of the control.
May I say something about that? It's a very interesting point you're raising there. The 3 alliances in Europe, IAG, SkyTeam, or Air France KLM, and the Lufthansa, have a very different style. And this goes back to the deeper history of European culture. The French adhere to Colbertism. Colbert was a minister of Louis XIV even in the 17th century. I said the state must be part of the company life of the country in question. So the state must have its fingers in every company. In the UK, the Anglo-Saxons say, no, state, Margaret Thatcher, you remember her? Says, no, we are going to privatize everything, the state goes out of business. Very different concept. The Germans, and there are no Germans in the room, you're not going to quote me, the term Germans roll over you. When the German purchased Austrian and Swiss, they had no say anymore. It's exactly what you say. They are a daughter company franchising. They still have Austrian Airlines, still have on the face of it some independence. Otherwise, they would lose their traffic rights. But minimal. minimal. The real decisions are being made in Frankfurt, not in Vienna and not in Zurich. In Air France KLM, for the reason I just told you, I'm very close to KLM, I know that certain things are combined. Purchase of aircraft and so on. But still, KLM has a relatively large degree of independence. They still call themselves still KLM, no reference to Air France anywhere. They have Dutch ownership and control. They operate from Schiphol. They have their blue. They don't have the same dresses as the Air France people. I flew on Air France this time. They say we are Air France. When I fly on KLM, we are KLM. They don't say we are Air France KLM. If you fly on Austrian Airlines, you will immediately hear we are part of Lufthansa. So it is. I can give you many other examples. You know, the Dutch and the French, for the Colbertism reason, which is a deep history, made treaties for retaining the independence of KLM. And tax-wise, because the principal place of business was Paris, and then the earnings of KLM would be taxed in France rather than in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands said, no, we don't want that. We want to keep the earnings. So they had to change the tax treaty Netherlands-France, because if a company has a principal place of business in another country, it's only taxed in the country where the company has its principal place of business, i.e. KLM is part of the Air France KLM group, principal place of business in Paris. So the French Minister of Finance can absorb all the income, tax all the income from both companies. So they had to change that, and there are a couple of other agreements and treaties. Lufthansa, not one single treaty with Austria and Switzerland. We picked them. Yeah, sorry to say that. That's a bit how Germans can be. But this is unquotable.
Lucky no German here. Yeah.
But maybe you have a German out.
Could be.
You have a German out? A German out or German grandmother?
No.
No one is going to report this. No. But I must say, I can say a lot of good things of Germany as well. A lot of good things of Germany as well. So this was just the Lufthansa thing.
Maybe one more question.
Yes. So you say that the FT control should be considered by the factual ownership.
Yes.
So
it has a legal dimension and a factual dimension.
Okay. So let me ask you your opinion. Like, you know, Lao Airlines is now the major shareholder is now Comac from China. So
Who's this?
Lao Airlines.
Who? Laos Airlines, yes.
So now they are 51% owned by Comac from China. Should, like, when they ask for the designated airlines that between Thai and Laos, should we treat them as a Lao flag carrier, or since now they are major owned by China?
Yeah,
what is your opinion?
Yeah, I understand your question. And this happens from time to time, this kind of situations. And you can deal with it in various ways. Your agreement, Thailand, the bilateral China, Thailand probably says majority owned and controlled. Designation must be majority owned and controlled by nationals of the designating country. Now, Laos apparently doesn't comply. You're not obliged to comply. So Laos can voluntarily say, I don't mind that this carrier is maybe a bit more Chinese. It is not an obligation, but it can also make it a negotiating chip and say, okay, I accept the designation of this, in fact, Chinese carrier, provided I get something from you in return. That has happened. I'll give you an example. Aerolíneas Argentina, 90% owned by Iberia in the 1990s, an old case. The Americans said, hey, you're not Argentinian, you're a Spanish carrier now. So we are not going to accept that. And then they're going to consult, negotiate. And then the Americans said, okay, we are prepared to accept Aerolíneas Argentinas as an Argentinian carrier, provided American Airlines, my airline, gets more flights from Dallas and from wherever they want to Buenos Aires. So that's a negotiating chip you can use.
Okay, maybe one last question. Do you have any question? No? Oh. Okay, maybe one last question before we adjourn. Since this throughout your talk, you mentioned Thai Airways, which is a big company in Thailand. But what about the implication for smaller carriers like Bangkok Air or Nok Air? Or
implications
for,
of EU-ASEAN
from the EU-ASEAN
perspective.
Agreement.
Well, Bangkok Airways will especially affect it when it flies under the rights or when it wants to fly under the rights of EU-ASEAN. So it can take advantage of it, but as I said before, the smaller carriers must also have the operational facilities and equipment, that's the word, better word, to fly from Bangkok to points in the European Union. And if they don't have that, they stay in the single air transport market of ASEAN. And that regime we discussed a bit, they can take advantage of that. But Bangkok Airways may see the ASEAN-EU agreement as a challenge or an encouragement for them to say, okay, we see that all these rights, traffic rights, are becoming available for ASEAN air carriers. I'm one of them. I'm an ASEAN air carrier. So let me, like Indigo is a good example, let me try to take advantage of those rights next to Thai Airways, in competition with Thai Airways, of course. Yes.
Okay, so I think it's getting interesting, but I think we have to adjourn because it's been more than 2 hours, but very fruitful presentation from you. I'm sure that both audiences from here and from online would get a lot of thought-provoking message from you. So on behalf of the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University, and on the co-host, the Faculty of Law, Thammasat University, and Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand and Bangkok Airways, thank you very much for your participation, and have a great week ahead. Thank you.